Hey, this is Seth Parnell, the minister of the Portia Church of Christ, and this is another episode of the Midweek Bible Study. This is episode 98, I believe. And so it's good to have you here tonight, whether you are watching this right now, whether you're with us live or whether you watch this later on. I want you to know that you are appreciated, and we are so happy that you would choose to spend some time here to study with us and to look at God's Word, with us. And so, hope that you are doing well. I know the today was opening day, for baseball, and the Cardinals won 9-0. That's a great start to a season if I ever saw one. Even though we are playing the Pirates, but it's a great start for them. And so, if you're able to watch that game, I hope that you enjoyed it, and you got a lot to look forward to. Not only with baseball, but with the year in general. I think there's a lot of positive things to look forward to. But we always want to extend an invitation to you. If you're someone who is in the Portia area, we are located at 307 South Jackson Street in Portia, Arkansas. And right now we are meeting at 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock on Sunday morning. If you're around Sunday morning, we have a class at 10 o'clock and the worship service at 11. I know you would enjoy both of those. And then we've got Sunday night is at 5 o'clock, and then Wednesday night is at 6 o'clock. And so if you're ever around any of those areas or any of those times, then we would welcome you to come join us. We'd love to have you and to get to know you and have you worship with us. And so just know you always have an invitation to come down and like I said, to see us sometime. Also, if you have any suggestions for like topics or questions, or if you have any suggestions for future episodes, then please feel free to get in contact with me. We'd love to hear what you have to say and try to produce things that will help people along and will benefit others in the long run. And so it's just know that you have that opportunity. I'm pretty easy to get a hold of. You can message the Portia Church of Christ, or you can get a hold of me personally, and we can take care of that. But we appreciate everyone being here tonight, and we got the Dunlaps. They're here. It's good to have you guys, and I hope everything is going well over your way today. I think it's good to have you guys here tonight. All right, we are going to take a look at Acts chapter 3 tonight. Acts chapter 3. This is a interesting passage, and that comes pretty early on in the development of the church. The church was established in Acts chapter 2. The foundation for the church was laid, all throughout the Gospels and throughout the Old Testament. And then in Acts chapter 2, it was finally established, to where the church could take form. It could take shape. And finally, people were living out, the church in their lives. As we always say, the church is not something that it's not a location that you can go to. It's not a structure, but it's comprised of the people that come together for a common purpose. And that purpose is to live for the glory of God, is to be a Christian, to be someone who glorifies God with what we do. And so we know that is what a church is, and that was what was established in Acts chapter 2. But when you get to the next chapter, we find that they're taking the next step in this process. So now that the church has been established, they have to go about doing the work of the church. If you remember, one thing that Jesus said on more than one occasion throughout the Gospels, he would say, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers, they are few. And so you'll pray that they'll send out laborers to the harvest. And so these apostles and these Christians who have been converted at that time, they set out to work, and they set out to spread the message of the gospel in a big way. And they were able to get some pretty good results, even though they would meet some resistance pretty early on, and they would have to navigate through some problems that they would encounter. But if you take a look at Acts chapter 3, we're going to read verses. Let's see here. We're going to read probably a good bit of this story, and then we'll kind of go over some of the points that I think that it can teach us. But in Acts chapter 3, starting in verse 1, it says, "Now Peter and John were going up to the temple at the hour of prayer, the 9th hour, and a man lame from birth was being carried, whom they laid daily at the gate of the temple, that is called the Beautiful Gate, to ask alms of those entering the temple. Seeing Peter and John about to go into the temple, he asked to receive alms. And Peter directed his gaze at him, as did John, and said, 'Look at us.' And he fixed his attention on them, expecting to receive something from them. But Peter said, 'I have no silver and gold, but what I do have I give to you. In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, rise up and walk.' And he took him by the right hand and raised him up, and immediately his feet and ankles were made strong. And leaping up, he stood and began to walk, and entered the temple with him, walking and leaping and praising God. And all the people saw him walking and praising God, and recognized him as one who sat at the beautiful gate of the temple, asking for alms. And they were filled with wonder and amazement at what had happened to him." So we see here, Peter and John. These are two of the apostles that would go about doing, like I said, go about doing good, go about doing the work that Jesus had tasked them with doing. And if you were at the lectureship at Freed Hardeman this year, that was the theme of their lectureship, to go about doing good. And this is part of what described the mission that Peter and the rest of the apostles had. And we find him here in this case going to the temple. They're going to the temple at the hour of prayer, which was the 9th hour. As we know, under the Jewish system, they had certain times in which they would pray, that they would set aside for prayer. And it would be at the 9th hour or the 6th hour, and they had these fixed times in their day in which they would dedicate that to at least a short portion of that to prayer, which is not a bad thing. I know if you were at Portia last night, Royce Lusk, one of our elders, he gave a devo, and he talked about that. He talked about the idea of prayer and setting aside time in order to do that. And that's something that they did back then, even though they had turned it into kind of a more of a legalistic type of command. They weren't necessarily praying with their heart, but they were kind of just keeping to the schedule, keeping to the kind of the command. And because of that, they weren't really doing as good as they should have been. It's good to have Glenda Johnson here. It's good to have you here. I hope things are going well for you. We appreciate you stopping by here with us. But these and so they had these times of prayer, and the ninth hour is about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and so that's the time in which they were going to the temple. And of course, at this time, oftentimes their day was more, it was more scheduled by how much daylight they had. They, when the sun came up and when the sun came down, kind of dictated a lot of what they could do. Nowadays, and we have lights out in the streets, and we have headlights for our cars. We have flashlights. We have all sorts of stuff that can help us get around in the dark. But back then, they didn't have these things, and so a lot of their schedule was dictated, by what time of day it was. And so that's why they have some of these rules about, when you go about and doing these things. And so it was about 3 o'clock and about the ninth hour, and Peter and John were going up to the temple, at this time. And as they were going, it says they encountered a man who was lame from birth. It means that he most likely had a birth defect, when he was born, and could not walk, and never learned how to walk, and just he was physically incapable of walking. And in order to support him, I guess other people would take him from where he resided and place him at the gate, at the temple gate right here, so that when people passed by, they might give him some alms, which is maybe a donation or some money, and so that he could support himself. And that was how he had to support himself in some manner. He could not work very well because of his deformity, and so pretty much the only option he had was to beg and to depend upon the charity of other people. And if you're going to the temple in order to worship, or if you're going to the temple in order to pray or to do something of that sort, then sometimes people feel more generous in those situations, and in that type of atmosphere. And so they laid him there, and this was his practice, and this is something that he had been doing for a very long time. This is not something he just started yesterday, but this was a practice that this man did for a very long time. And then when Peter and John, they come by him, and they see this man, and he calls attention to them, and he asks to receive some money from them. It says that he asked to receive alms, and he did not know. He had no clue at who he was talking to or what this would lead to. But he asked them for alms, and most likely he had his head down in kind of a humble position, because if you're someone who is begging for money just to survive, then you're not going to have a lot of pride in you. You're not going to have a lot of that in the way that you do things. And so he has his head down, and he's wanting to receive something from Peter and John. But when he does this, when he calls out to these men, in verse 4, it says, and Peter directed his gaze at him, as did John. So both of them looked directly at this man. And Peter says, look at us. He tells them to look up and look right at them. And so it says in verse 5, he says he fixed his attention on them. He looked right at John and Peter. And then it has one of those great verses in the Bible that kind of speak to what Peter and John did. It says, and Peter he directed his gaze, as did John, and in verse 5 it says, and he fixed his attention on them, expecting to receive something from them. But Peter said, I have no silver and gold, but what I do have I give you. In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, rise up and walk. And he took him by the hand, raised him up, and immediately his feet and ankles were strong. He's standing there. He's hoping to receive some money from them just so he could just so he could get by. And when they say look at us, maybe he thinks, well, this is good. They're going to give me something. They're going to maybe give me a little bit of money so I can get by. But instead, Peter says, I don't have silver, I don't have gold, but what I do have, I give to you in the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth. And he says, rise up, and walk. That's a powerful verse, when you think about it. He's looking at this man who's in a hopeless situation, and he says, I'm not going to give you what you're expecting, but I'm going to give you something so much more. I'm going to give you something that is beyond what you could think of even asking. And he says, to rise up and walk. And it says immediately, it wasn't that gradual process, but immediately he got up. It says his feet and ankles were made strong, and he began to leap and to walk and to run around. I mean, can you imagine that feeling? You're someone who hasn't walked for a verse later on is going to say that he was over 40 years old. And so we don't know how old he was, but we know he wasn't a young man. He was someone who was over over 40. And he's able to walk for the first time. He's able to jump. And like I said, this was not something that was done halfway. If you hurt your ankle, or if you maybe hurt your knee, I've done a lot of running in my time, and sometimes you pick up a knee injury or an ankle injury, and when you do that, a lot of times you want to go easy on it. You don't want to aggravate the injury any further, and so you kind of take care of it, and you don't do anything that would risk you hurting it again. And so if you have hurt your ankle, you're not going to be jumping up and down or leaping, because that might hurt it again. But this healing was so complete that this man who had never walked before is able to jump up and down. He's able to run and to walk, and he's able to enjoy all of that. This was a full and complete healing. In our Bible class, on Wednesday night at Portia, we were talking about Matthew chapter 8, and how there's so many stories of Jesus, healing people, and how he heals, a leper. He heals, a servant. He's someone who heals so many different people, with what he does. And Peter, and John, through the power of the Holy Spirit, they were able to do this, as well. And they're able to raise this man and give him something that he never expected, what was possible. But you think about us, and you think about, the things that we encounter, with, and how we look at, God. You have to ask the question, what do you expect, from God? If you're someone who becomes a Christian, if you're someone who is living, that Christian life, what do you expect, from God? What do you expect to get from a relationship, with Him? What is your perception, that you're going to receive, from God, when you obey Him, when you make that decision to become a Christian? There's been a lot of perceptions over the years about what Christianity is and what it means, to you. Some people believe that Christianity, makes you a better person, which it does. It does make you a better person. As I always say, being a Christian makes you, if you truly follow what it has to say, what the scriptures have to say, it makes you the best version of yourself, that you can be. And it does make you a good person, but it's so much more, than that. Some people see it as something that can, as something that can not only make you a better person, but maybe make you right with God, and be something that can get you to heaven, and which it does. It does do those things as well. But when we think about, what can we expect, from God? we expect God to do things, His way. We expect Him to do things, on His time. But what do you expect from Him when you become a Christian? Sometimes, we come to Him with those expectations of being a better person, or being someone who is who has improved their life. But when we look at what the scriptures say, we receive you from God. He says, and Peter is going to allude to this later on when he's challenged for what they have done. He's going to say that you know, the name of Christ is something that provides life when there is no life. It's something that provides, freedom from sin, freedom from the death, that sin brings. It's something that gives us, purpose. It's something that gives us, a hope that cannot be found, anywhere else. That is, all those things can come from God. It's so much more than being a better person. It's so much more than just receiving something, or looking towards the future. But right now, right here, we can be blessed by God. Like we said, God does things His way. He does things on His time. If you ask Him for $1 million, He's probably not going to give you that. It's probably not in His plan. I don't know. I can't speak for God, but God doesn't exist in order to fulfill our every wish, or our every command. But it does say that God cares for us. It does say that God He looks out for us as His children. And sometimes I think we may expect, too little from God. Sometimes when we read the Bible and see how the Bible describes God, and then we think about, at least I know I have, in the past, and I think about how I see God, sometimes I think my expectations may fall a little short, because it's hard to fathom someone who is like God, someone who can do the things that He can do, that He would care for someone, like us. And yet He can give us, so much more than anything that this world has to offer. And that's what this man here saw, who was, at this gate. And he never expected this to happen. But through the power of Jesus, he can be someone that can defy our expectations and give us something that is so much more. If we open our eyes, if we're willing to walk, in His way, we can be blessed. We can be given the things that we need. Sometimes it's not the things, like I said, that we want, but God always gives us what we need in order to be someone that gets through this life. And that's something that is very, very important to understand. But he is he is called, and he jumps up, and Peter and John, that they take him in, and that they go into the temple. And it says that he was continuing to walk and leap and praise God, and all the people saw him, and they recognized him as the one who sat at the beautiful gate. And the reason it was called a beautiful gate, because it was made from Corinthian brass. If you remember, Paul wrote a letter to the Corinthians. It's from that city, and it was big, it was massive, and it's something that kind of gleamed in the sunlight. And it looked so good that they called it the beautiful gate. And so people recognized him. They said, this is not someone that Paul or that Peter and John had brought with them, but this was the guy who was setting out the gate, and he sat at that gate for a very, very long time. They had probably seen him for years, maybe, and they recognized, and it says that they were filled with wonder and amazement at what happened to him. They couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe at what God had done, to this man, what Peter and John were able to accomplish, through the power of God. And it's important to note that, because this is something that Peter will say when everybody starts coming to him, and everybody starts to kind of crowd in and to see this wonder that they had done. Peter, he speaks to them in verses 11, down and following. It says, and in verse 12, it says, and when Peter saw it, he addressed the people, and he said, "Men of Israel, Why do you wonder at this? Or why do you stare at us, as though by our own power or piety we have made him walk? The God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, the God of our fathers, and the God of our fathers glorified his servant Jesus, whom you delivered over and denied in the presence of Pilate when he had decided to release him. He said, yeah, it's not by our own power or our own goodness or own piety that this was accomplished, but it is, through the very one that you crucified not very long ago. As I said, this takes place, pretty close to the crucifixion. Those events had transpired. They're still fresh in the minds of probably a lot of people. And Peter says, it's not us. We didn't do this. It's not something that we've done, by our own goodness. We can't do that. But yet that one you crucified, the Messiah that came to us and that you put on a cross, this is through his power, because even though he was killed on the cross, he's someone who was raised again, and he's someone who still lives, today. And Peter will go on to address them, and he will, kind of, tell them, what is going on, and how, and he refers to Jesus as the holy and righteous one. He refers to him as the author of life, and he refers to him, as as a servant. There's so many ways in which you can refer to Jesus, and Peter, he tells this story. He tells this to them, and kind of confronts them again, as we see. Peter has a sermon in Acts chapter 2, and he has another one here in Acts chapter 3 after following this healing. And it's interesting to see this one's going to be even more successful than his previous one. But he would go on to say, I know that you've acted in ignorance, as did all your rulers, but what God foretold by the mouth of all the prophets that Christ would suffer, this was fulfilled. As I said, it was prophesied, by the Old Testament prophets that Jesus would go to the cross, and that's indeed, what happened. And it's something that took place. And this, this chapter is going to end with Peter's address, here, as he finishes up and continuing to talk about, the prophets, and how even go all the way back to Abraham, and saying that Jesus was a fulfillment of a promise that God made to Abraham when he said, all that and in your offspring shall all the families of the earth you'll be blessed. And so this is something that was a long time coming, yet they couldn't see it, they couldn't recognize it. And Peter, he confronts them with it, and it's a good opportunity, because they had just seen what the power of God could do, and now they're presented with the information about how they can follow him. And it's interesting when you take a look at the next chapter, in Acts chapter 4. This is something that gets them in trouble. It's something that Peter and John, they get in trouble for this, as the chief priests, and the Sadducees and all them. They don't like him. They don't like them being in the temple and preaching this type of thing. But yet they can't do much to them, because the people are rejoicing, and the people are amazed at what had just transpired. In fact, if you take a look, as I said, at chapter 4, and we can see, I think it has the results of this. Yeah, here we go. In chapter 4 of the book of Acts, in verse 4, it says, "But many of those who had heard the word believed, and the number of the men came to about 5,000." And so we know that 3,000 were there at Pentecost. They obeyed the gospel, and now we have 5,000. And some people believe that either it was 5,000 in this instance, or it was 2,000 that brought the total up to 5,000. But this is a lot of people who believed because of what happened. And but the Pharisees, like I said, and the Sadducees and the chief priests, they did not like it. In verse 2, it says they were greatly annoyed because they were teaching the people. and proclaiming that Jesus had been raised from the dead. And so, even though that God is powerful, even though He is someone who has authority and power over all else, that doesn't mean that you're not going to meet resistance. You're not going to meet problems and trials that are brought your way. God has given us, He has given us as people. He has given us free will, the ability to make choices, whether they are right or they're wrong. And sometimes people make the wrong choice, and other people have to suffer for wrong choices that are made. You think about the situation that is happening in the world right now. With a lot of people, with a lot of destruction going on over in Eastern Europe. With Russia and Ukraine. The decisions were made by one party in order to attack, and in order to make make people suffer. And that's a choice that they have to make, and other people have suffered from those choices. Sometimes we're going to meet resistance, and we're going to have to work through some hard times in order to stay on that narrow road. Almost the entirety of Acts chapter 4 is Peter and John getting arrested for preaching the gospel, and they are threatened. They are severely chastised for doing this, and they don't back down, but yet they continue to preach the gospel. And as one of the verses that I think I referenced earlier in verse 12, one of those verses that always sticks in my mind. In verse 12, it's at the end of Peter's his reply to them. It says, "And there is salvation in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved." There is no other name in which we can be saved. Even though there's a lot of people who will disagree, there's a lot of people who will laugh at or resist you or dismiss the power that Jesus has. There's no other name which we can be saved. And so when we read these stories, we see him heal the slain man. We see him heal the blind. We see him raise people from the dead. We know that power is there. And so do we believe that the promises that he has given us will they come to pass? He's already given us so much evidence that he has the power to do so. And so I think we can look forward to the future with great confidence, knowing that what he has told us will come to pass, and that we're not going to be someone who has been found wasting our time or looking at something that is fanciful or whimsical, or like I said, like a waste of a person's time. But the promises of God always deliver, and he has shown that he has the power to make it come to pass. And he has also demonstrated the love that makes that commitment to us, and so that we know that we will be held up. And so that's an encouraging thought to think of, as we go forward. But there is so much that we could take a look at here with Acts chapter 3, 4, and 5, as it details some of these early happenings in the church. But I think we will stop right there for tonight, and we look forward to next week, as we'll have another episode next Thursday night at 7:00. Next week we will have Tyler Killow from Paragould. He is going to join us for our Bible study, and we're going to take a look at the book of Luke and kind of the image of Jesus, and how he, or I think it's Luke chapter 9, and how we can better conform to the image of Jesus. And 2 weeks from now, on the 21st, I believe, we'll have David Diffenbaugh from the Center Hill Church of Christ. He is going to be with us, and I know you're going to enjoy his lessons as well. But with that being said, I think that we will call it an end for tonight. As I said, I hope this is something that has benefited you and done you some good. I always enjoy studying with you guys, and I hope that you can go out and be the light of the world and be someone who who lives for the glory of God in the best way that you can. I'll see you next time.